I gave an intro to this in the end of our last session, but I want to say this is a group of people who will introduce themselves in a minute. But we have 4 parents with us who have inspired me, some for years, some more recently. They inspire me in different ways, but the common denominator is they keep hope alive in unique ways in their life that I really can see. Like I can just see, wow, look at them working at keeping a hopeful lens on life. And that helps me, right? Hope begets hope. So even when I see somebody else doing it, it like reminds me, yeah, you too can do this, Ruth. So I'm just very grateful for them being here. I'll let them share a little bit about themselves as we get started. But first, let me get what we're going to talk about here on my screen, and I'll start you off and let me, yeah, no, that's not for me, good. Okay, so panelists, Julia, Kim, Trisha, says Nami, but that's Brittany. These are ladies who have a lot of experience in their own lives in terms of having youth with mental illness, who know their systems of care and know about resources that help the journey. And so again, I'll let them speak to that. But what I'm going to start out with is I'm going to ask each of you to tell us a bit about your journey with hopefulness. And I can remind you of this if you need to as we go, but it's sort of a multi-part question. Did hopefulness come naturally to you? Have you worked at it, and how? So let's just start. Maybe Julia, who I have known the longest of all of these wonderful people, would you start us off with a bit about the role hope has played in your life and who you are?
Absolutely. So quick introduction. My name is Julia Laughlin. I am a state trainer and facilitator for NAMI Utah for the Family to Family and Family and Friends courses. Grew up in Potomac, Maryland. Ruth and I were housemates in college, so we've known each other quite a long time. I am a geologist, very happily married with 3 adult children. So that's a little bit about me. And I already forgot my question. Was it the first question, Ruth? My journey with hopefulness?
Yeah, journey with hopefulness. And in the chat, it will remind all of you, was this like a natural journey? Did you have to work at it? How?
It's been really interesting because once I watched Dr. Hellman's TED Talk, I'm rethinking all of this. But if you had asked me that before his TED Talk, I would have said that hopefulness came pretty naturally to me. And I do still believe that in some ways. And what I realized after watching his TED Talk was a lot of my goal setting and behavior is avoidant as opposed to achievement oriented. And I have never thought of that before that TED Talk. So that was a huge revelation for me. I think I do feel like I'm a fairly hopeful, I'm a very high energy person, and I feel like I am a fairly hopeful person. So in some ways, I think that comes naturally. Exercise and the outdoors, which is how I wound up in Utah, are such a huge part of my wellness. And I think even when I didn't know that consciously, my body knew it. And that's how I got here. Being out in nature and moving is a big part of me remaining well and hopeful. So I'm so glad that I am where I am.
Nice. Thanks so much. Trisha, how about you?
Well, the question was, did hopefulness come naturally to me? I would say that I was a pretty hopeful kid, and then at 15 became diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so that day, that moment, they tell you you will die, and in short order. And so it's been 35 years of this journey, and that I'm going to die is not a hopeful place to live in. And so with that diabetes comes anxiety and depression and self-doubt. And so I have to revisit it often. I was just looking through some of my stuff and I was like, oh, the book, What Happy People Know. Yes. So I'm constantly searching for hopefulness, not necessarily a magic bullet, but what can I do as a part of my life on a daily basis to cultivate hopefulness. So to me, I thought, well, either have it or you don't. Well, that's not true. It can be cultivated and it can be activated. So I think naturally, I am a natural, hopeful person, but I have to nurture it and I have to activate it almost on a regular basis, for sure, for me. And now that I've been told I'll live to be 80, that fear of death is not so prominent. It's like, man, I better continue to work on this hopefulness and what does my future look like, instead of looking at, oh, when I'm 60, I don't have to worry about anything anymore. So yeah, it's I have to cultivate it and activate it almost on a constant basis.
Thanks for sharing that. I do want to acknowledge that Tricia put me onto the book Learned Hopefulness when we were talking about this conference and the concept of hope. And that shows she was using that book as a tool in her life to activate hope. And now we all get it as a result of that. So thanks for sharing. Kim, how about you?
Hi, I'm Kim Hokinson, and I wear many different hats. I sit on the State Planning Council. I sit on the Juvenile Justice Commission. I was one of the 5 original parents that was received a letter of notation to work as a consultant within our system of care, and a few other hats, mostly advocacy. And let's see, does hope come naturally to me? So it didn't, obviously, in my journey. It did not come. I think we all can empathize with the concept that at one point in our lives we experienced hopelessness, which either initiated that change or the desire to change. It actually, my journey consisted of finding somebody that was amazing and was willing to mentor me. That mentorship consisted of empowering me and letting me know that I am my own expert when it comes to my kids, which is not something I had ever experienced in my life, not with the schools or the doctors or the mental health clinicians, but it was important. And because of that, and my type A personality, I had to do a lot of research. I had to do a lot of learning. And I think that really opened up hope within me and hope within my family, because I became an expert in our system of care, very familiar with other systems of care across the country. And now it's almost second nature to help other families with my knowledge base and experience, to try to encourage that hope to be present for them. And I work at it still to this day, because obviously I do have experiences or moments of where I'm discouraged by the system of care, but I no longer experience that helplessness or hopelessness. So that in and of itself is huge for me and my family, and hopefully other families that I work with.
Thank you, Kim. Kim does an extraordinary amount here in Idaho with our system of care. And I want to say, and before I go on to Brittany, which I will, that quite a few of us online today, some still have kids in their home, but not all of us do. But we're still in this journey because we know what it was like for us, and we want it to be better for other people, and we still hold hope. I think what I need is the hope that this won't always be so hard for families, and kids will not always be lacking the help that they need at these pivotal times in their life. So we kind of keep the flame of hope alive, not just for ourselves to feel better about our world, but very much for other families to have a better experience. And it's really nice to share in that community of people who do that. Brittany, tell us a little bit about you and your journey with hope.
Hi guys. So similarly to kind of every other parent who's here today, I also wear lots of hats. Professionally, I am the executive director at the Wood River Valley affiliate of NAMI, and serve on lots of boards, but all for the reason of hope. It really does all come back to that. I was a young parent and I had always been bound thinking like education is where I belong. That's where I want to be. I want to help others learn. But it didn't take me long to figure out the fact that my belief is very systemic and higher level with like macro problem solving. And so it didn't take me long to realize that there were issues happening in the schools I was working in. And these families were struggling, and I wasn't taken serious as a young parent for knowing what my child needed. And so that made me transition into social work, which has allowed me to help and work with so many of the individuals who I can see on the screen right now. But it's allowed me to help flourish into a different realm of helping other parents find hope. I do feel like for myself, initially it came naturally. I would say initially it was there very naturally and intrinsically for me to believe that there was help, that there was answers, that there were resources, and I wasn't going to stop searching. And even if that meant changing policy and things like that, because there's always a way. And sometimes it's about surrounding yourself with the right people, but that makes a huge difference. And so while I would say it was innately always there, it's definitely when you're dealing with struggles of youth who have any kind of condition, behavioral health, physical, cognitive, developmental, anything, it takes a lot of work to continue to foster that. And I know Trisha talked to that a little. And so I frequently had to work to foster my hope and keep it going when it felt like there was too much to handle. And because of that, I always remind myself that in the moments that I can advocate for others, it's because somebody else needs a minute to get their hope back online. And when somebody else, and if I'm feeling at my max capacity, then that's when I can count on somebody else to also support me while I work on my own hope and fulfilling that need for myself.
That's just a superb segue into our next question, which is, do you guys still go through periods of not feeling hopeful? And tell us a bit about that. And what I'm really interested in is, how do you recognize that you're there? And then how do you pull yourself through that? So let's start with Trisha on that one.
So, during this worldwide pandemic, I lost 3 of my parents. And during that time, I was involved in 3 mediations with our school district. Huge things. My father passes away, my stepdad passes away, my father passes away, and I'm going through these mediations while trying to be on all these boards and do all these good things. And then suddenly, without any warning, my mother dies from COVID. And I was devastated. Let me tell you that the absolute devastation of your North Star leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, wait a second, pull back. I have to completely pull back and say, who am I? What do I want? What is most important? Because those are all things my parents said to me all the time. Who are you? What is most important? What do you want? And so I had to go through and figure out through a very deeply painful, the world's going through the same pandemic. I'm just having a little bit more difficult experience with myself. And so I think that I started searching. I'm a learner by nature. And so searching everything I could get my hands on. And as soon as once you're drawn to something, it kind of speaks to you. And this work, Learned Hopefulness, spoke to my heart. And I thought, I can do this. one day at a time, one micro goal at a time. I can do this, and I can do it by myself because I know that I am capable of, I can control myself. And so that's what happened to me, is that I had to, it was major, because I think that I lose hope periodically, and then it comes back by the people that I'm with. But through this pandemic and the death of my family members, it took a lot of effort. I had to pull back and refocus, and that's okay. That's what I found.
Thank you, Tricia. Absolutely. How about you, Julia?
Definitely have had periods of not feeling hopeful for sure. Have lost two very close friends in the last 7 months. My mom's had to go into dementia care. And in the last 9 years, 2 children with severe mental illness diagnosis. And what I have found is, and for me, luckily, I am able, like you referenced earlier, Ruth, to come out of this. So I definitely won't compare this to someone who, like you said, struggles with depression. But for me, if I just allow myself to feel really, really sad and just sit in that and not judge it and not force myself out of it. And I don't say this as some kind of self-congratulatory thing. It amazes me, honestly. If I sit in my hopelessness long enough, I always wind up like underneath all of it in gratitude, regardless of what it is. It's just so beautiful. So I've come to a place where I can trust that that will happen. Again, I'm not saying that that could necessarily work for anyone, but for me, that works. Just being there, allowing myself to feel and not judging it, and just not putting a time frame on how long I'm allowed to feel that way. And even I'll be sitting there just sobbing, and all of a sudden gratitude will just come over me. So for me, that's been the ticket, is allowing myself to feel and not judging it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, nicely articulated. Thank you so much for sharing that. How about you, Kim? Periods of not feeling hopeful, and how do you recognize that or pull yourself through that?
I wouldn't say that I necessarily go through periods of not feeling hopeful. I think that between Dr. Hellman's 2 pieces, which would be pathways and willpower, I keep forging forward. But I do, obviously, like I mentioned before, have those periods where I'm really discouraged with the system. Those moments happen when I'm helping families and I'm hearing the exact same story that I have already lived. That's very discouraging for me, because what I hadn't mentioned is that my story began 21 years ago.
Kim, will you, sorry, I'm interrupting you, just to ask you to just speak a little closer to your microphone to make sure everybody can hear. It's just a little soft. Sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying 21 years ago is when my story began, but my journey with hope actually started 8 years ago. And I found it was really easy to kind of get into that groove. So another fun fact about myself is I'm really an expert in sarcasm. So I find that when I am feeling really discouraged, I do resort to my sarcasm, and people tend to laugh, and that actually helps me feel better because laughter is contagious. So that's one of the pathways that I've chosen to kind of pull myself out of that discouraged state. And then also just research. I am that person that really likes to understand things better and understand options in front of me. I think that's part of my type A personality, but I found that that has worked. It's not only benefited myself and my family, but it's also benefited the families that I work with.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And Brittany, how about you on this same topic?
I would honestly echo a lot of the things that have already been shared. I definitely think it's a combination to keep yourself in that place. And what works one time might not work the next time. And so always being ready to evolve and work on yourself is critical. I think for myself, I've had to, when there's periods of struggle, whether it's my 17-year-old who struggles with his own behavioral health and developmental disabilities, or my 7-year-old who has special health care needs and a rare genetic condition, it's no matter what, it's always reminding myself to be compassionate, that our children don't come with a manual. There's the what to expect when you're expecting book, but the reality is that's not on par for if your pregnancy goes different than the typical pregnancy, or if your kid suddenly starts developing differently. Those books don't work. And so, you're stuck trying to navigate it on your own. And I know when I work with families and youth, I'm frequently reminding them to be compassionate with themselves, you don't know what you don't know, and that's not your fault. And reminding them to keep in mind that their child is always who they were meant to be. Their child is always the individual they were born to be. You just have to reroute your own brain's thinking that maybe you're not coaching a little league team. Maybe you're not taking your kid to ballet recitals. It might look different, but as soon as you can embrace that, you'll have a better communication and relationship with your family and your child. And I have to remind myself that too. And so I think that's for me, reminding myself that I need to give the same advice to myself, just like we would to parents, youth, things like that. And so a lot of my work is rooted in suicide prevention and postvention. And we have a whole countywide postvention plan that puts me at the helm of initiating it. Well, my oldest son's father did die by suicide, and when he was a baby. And so we look at that now and talk a lot about, okay, I thought we handled it the best way to make sure he had the information, understood how his father died when he was old enough, but maybe that wasn't right. But I can't blame myself over that, and know that we did the best of what we could in the moment, and we'll continue to navigate that. And just those constant reminders makes a difference for me.
I really resonate with what you're saying. I'm somebody who had clearly didn't realize it until it was right in front of my face that I had these expectations for my children and who they would be and what they would do, the milestones they would hit, and the education they would embrace. And then just, wow, no. And not only did I have to reset my own expectations, but I had to work on a sense of shame that I felt, because in my family, you are grateful for your education and you take it seriously and you go to every level of education that is offered to you. And that was not the right path for my kids, but it really took me a while to come off of my expectation but that's the only path. That's the only path I knew about. And then I knew that I could accept that based on who my children were, because I was getting to know my children. But I knew that I had brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and grandparents who could not understand that. And probably, I'm quite sure to this day, do not understand what seem like poor choices that we have made. So you got to be your own best expert on you and your kids, right? As this group is referred to. One thing I want to mention, because I prompted for a question about, do you feel hopeless and how do you pull yourself out of it? And this is a reminder, and I'm going to thank my staff for reminding me to remind you that when we are in a very hopeless place that is driven by clinical depression, we should not just accept that we're there and we'll just stay there until someday we'll just feel like pulling ourselves out. Okay, if you can't know in some part of your brain or body that, yeah, I'm here and I can get out of this when I'm ready. But as Julia said, or I said earlier, I just want to be here right now. I got to feel all these hard feelings. If you don't have some touch with the fact that you will be able to move through this when you are ready and in fairly short order, then you need help. And you may be dealing with a clinical depression that none of us are going to tell you should hold on to and wait to pull yourself out of. Okay, so we just want to make sure that we're making the point that flagging hope is different. It's a different animal than clinical depression, which is a beast, right? Okay. All right, let's talk about the TED Talk. What impact did Dr. Hellman's TED Talk have on you? What was like some of the most surprising or impactful or empowering things he had to say or information he had to share? And let me start with Brittany. How about you on that?
Okay. So for me, I would say what stuck out probably the most for me was just that, there's not one way to do it. And I think there's not one way to find hope and stick with it. And there's different kind of avenues, different trajectories or roads that we're all going to travel down. And I think that stuck with me the most because I spent a lot of time thinking about the fact that my journey, even with hope, is going to look different today than it looked last year, than it's going to look next month. And it's the same with individuals who I'm supporting and helping, and who are struggling. And so just reminding myself that, we all know our journeys were different, but I think when it comes to hope, right, it's such this broad umbrella of a term. And so often it's like, oh, well, we just have hope, or you have to be hopeful, but what's the action to it? And so thinking about a lot more of there's different ways to activate hope, I think was hopeful for me, in all honesty. So I really enjoyed that and just having that perspective. And it's something I know I plan to integrate a lot more into our daily lives, be that at home or at work, because I think it all echoes so true.
Here, I'm with you on that. Kim, do you have anything to add to that? I know you spoke about the video a little, referenced it earlier, but anything you can add there?
Can you hear me a little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I really enjoyed his TED Talk. I had to watch it 5 or 6 times because the very first time I watched it, I found my mind taking me to past experiences with both the system and my own life with my kids. And of course, it happened the second time and the third time. And so by the 6th time, I was able to actually make it through the entire TED Talk without drifting off and reminiscing in my own life. So I think the most impactful piece for me, especially with what I do, was when he referenced the power of hope, right? So that was super impactful. It really resonated with me for different reasons. Because he says at the heart of change is our ability to understand the way things are right now in our lives. I think that's huge because I think all of us that make a difference within our lives and the system, we all have to recognize where we are and where our kids are and where the system is. And then when he went on to say that we can begin to imagine the way things could be, I think that is significant because, we all hope that, or wish in his terms, that the system could be better, right? The families that come forward and they share their stories, they're not doing that because they have so much expendable time on their hands. It's a means to fill time. They're doing it because they want that story to impact others or the system or both. And then finally, when he had mentioned that this is where hope is born and we should learn to be a little more intentional in our social connections, that has been my entire journey. So my connections with my mentor, my connections with the system, my connections with other families that are struggling, and of course, my connections with FYIdaho. Yeah, that was a plug. I mean, it's been significant, and each piece has been imperative to my personal journey for hope. And I think that, and I hope, obviously, that that is also the case for the parents that I have helped over the years, that connection was so important and hope was so contagious that they walked away with more hope than they had started with.
Thank you, Kim. Boy, really, in a lot of ways, all of us, because we all end up working with other people and families, doesn't matter whether it's your job to before I came to this job. It just happened in my life. People knew my journey and told other people that you should talk to Ruth. It sounds like your life is like hers. So I know you've all experienced that. And the work we do at FYIdaho, it is fanning hope. It is helping people attach to it when they're, especially when they're not feeling it, right? That is such an incredible gift to give. And I know all of these ladies speaking to you right now do that for others. And specifically going on what Kim said, Kim is now a mentor to others working in the system. And boy, has she kept a lot of hope alive with a lot of individual families over time. And I know that's true for the rest of you as well. Julia, how can you speak to that one for us?
The piece that really spoke to me was that hope is a choice. Just the idea, I think not knowing I have choices is the same as feeling hopeless. So when I know that I always have choices, that is so empowering. And that is what he spoke to. So I'm trying to wean myself off saying I need to, I should, I have to. I choose to, I choose to, I choose to, I choose to. And then if what follows the rest of that sentence doesn't make sense, then it's my opportunity to look at that and go, why am I doing that then? So that was huge for me. The idea that hope is a choice, that everything in my life is a choice. Sure, things happen to me, but what I do with what happens, I always have that choice. That is extremely hopeful for me.
Thank you for that. Choices was a big theme of our day. And Brittany, how about you on that? Oh no, I started with you, didn't I? Trisha, sorry. Trisha.
I was just thinking about what all the things that have been said, and what I have written in my notes from the TED Talk was imagination is the instrument for hope. And so as I imagine my life now and the future, what does that look like? And so multiple pathways. So I experience barriers in different kinds of ways with my 5 children, with my own health, with the systems that I'm involved in. There are barriers, but there's also multiple pathways to make change occur for my own health and for the hopefulness I have for my children and for my community. And so my path does not have to be your path, because it's whatever you imagine that you want it to be. And so I think that for myself, living in a rural community, I have chose my own path, and it's not one that was dictated or given to me, but I've found the path that feels right for me with the people and the partners that feels right to me. And so I think that was a big thing. Imagination is the instrument of hope. And so what does it look like? What do you want it to look like? Was really big from the talk and pretty powerful to me.
Yeah, I hope some of you are having the experience that I am, though, of course, I'm a little more familiar with working with the material, but we're hearing so many words from our panelists that represent or literally speak to what we heard all day about possibilities, adjusting perceptions, and ways of being very active in cultivating hope in our lives. I want to just make sure I put in the chat that if any of you with us have some questions that you'd like the panel to address, I would love to hear them, and you can just type them into the chat, or we can pull you off mute, but you just let us know. And until I see any, I'm going to go to a final question. It's a final question until I just sort of open it up and suggest that if anybody has any last words to share, we would love that too. But my final question is, and you may not all have an answer to this, but what's been the biggest hurdle or challenge that you have overcome that has really helped you stay hopeful for your life? So maybe an example of hope begets hope, or something that just as you got through, over, or around this hurdle, had you standing in a more hopeful place for your life. How about Julia?
I could go on forever on that. I'll keep it brief. Learning how to integrate ways of being that I learned growing up in a traumatic childhood. Learning how to integrate those into behaviors that serve me in the present, with the support of various different groups that I meet with weekly and my therapist, has changed my entire life and helped me stand more in who I authentically am, which is a very hard thing for any of us to, none of us ever get there, but to discern. That journey and the group that I participate in to be on that journey has changed everything in my life and made everything more hopeful.
That's huge. And I've had a little touch with Julia to understand at times that I've been able to visit her, or we've caught up on the phone. And this is why one of the reasons I wanted Julia on this panel, because she has sought out these valuable resources, in this case, this valuable group. And it has just brought so much to her life, as you're hearing her speak to. And that's just really powerful. That's all about seeking help and knowing there are possibilities and looking for them. So thank you so much for sharing that. Brittany, how about you on that?
For me, very similarly to Julia, I mean, I feel like there's so many instances when I think about this exact question and, what was the hurdle that you've overcome that has helped? And I think there are so many. But I would say, because a lot of hurdles we're overcoming continue to require constant work. And so it's hard to sometimes look back and say, I did this, or this made a difference in my life, because you're still in it. You're still in the thick of it. And so it doesn't feel like that's, you're at the end or the finish line with that hurdle yet. However, I think probably the biggest one that I feel like I can honestly say we've hit the finish line would have to do with just engaging in suicide prevention work. Losing, my high school sweetheart, my son's father, who struggled with his own behavioral health conditions and his own trauma, that ultimately led to his ending his own life. That's something that I refused to continue to accept to be a norm in my community. We in the Wood River Valley, as a resort town, have a significantly high rate in deaths by suicides. And so that's something I was positive I wanted to be a part of the solution of, and not just have his death be another part of my story, but I wanted to fix that. And I wanted to make people feel like that wasn't always going to be the case. That wouldn't always be an option. And so now when I look at all the years work we put into this and having a whole countywide post-vention response plan for any sudden deaths, it could be an accident on the ski hill, car accident, but having a response plan to make sure that people are getting the critical support they need after a sudden unexpected loss, and making sure that there are plans in place for our entire community that allow us to work with businesses and help businesses navigate their grief for losing a coworker and things like that. And that's the one thing I can truly say. I stayed hopeful throughout all these years on that journey because I wanted to be a part of the solution and not have the people who, lost their lives not have an impact long-term. And I know there's things we can do. And so for me, I stayed hopeful knowing that being a part of the solution could help fix the problem at large.
Such a great example of the silver linings that can come out of very tragic circumstances. Because Brittany just named a whole lot of things that happened as a result of that trauma and that death that are now helping other people. And that's huge. Thanks for sharing that. Kim, how about you on biggest hurdles you've overcome and how you've stayed hopeful?
This is, I feel like, a loaded question. Because, at first when I had started all of this, I thought my biggest hurdle was my children's serious emotional disturbance. And as I really delved into this work, I realized that it was not my children's serious emotional disturbance that was my biggest hurdle. It was my anger and my resentment towards the system that continually failed my children and pointed the finger back at me. That was my biggest hurdle. Because when I started this work, I'm eons away from where I am now, because this whole process started with snotty tears and passive aggressive comments and finger pointing and just a lot of animosity. Learning to really reshape my story and apply it to examples of the system so that they could actually see real life execution in there's barriers, there's gaps. That was probably hard because obviously in some moments I still do have that hurdle. It's definitely not fixed. I still encounter that hurdle when a family comes to me, like I said earlier, and they tell me a story that sounds just like my life. And I have to think to myself, okay, take a deep breath. Let's see what we can do to move forward. And but every once in a while, that nice passive aggressiveness comes rearing its ugly head. And so definitely not perfect. It's still a hurdle I'm working on, but that would be it.
Thank you. That's huge, very impactful, and that's a big hurdle. Trisha, how about you?
I would say the biggest hurdle that I've had to overcome is my own self-doubt. I was a school counselor, social worker for 12 years before I encountered a massive trauma experience and huge health things related to my diabetes. And so up until that point, 12 years ago, I thought I was amazing. I was doing amazing things in the community I was in. And then I adopted my 3 younger children, and huge self-doubt. No one's listening to me. Nobody cares what I have to say. I have all this professional and personal experience, and they're still not listening to me. Kind of like what Kim was saying, it's your fault. You don't know what you're talking about. You're the problem. And so that self-doubt. And so what I think I found for myself is that to be hopeful, I'm in charge of those things. I'm in charge of my hopefulness. And so that means that when I have self-doubt, I have to say to myself, what can you do? What are you doing? And is it of value? And so everything I engage in has meaning and value for myself, but is primarily serving others. This is Hope Week, right? And nobody wanted to bring Hope Week to Emmett. I thought, well, if nobody's going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And that was, I'm like, I'm in charge. I can be a committee of one. And so that doubt of, I don't have time, I don't have energy. Yes, you do. And you can find it in your partners. I found a partner, the city librarian, amazing. And then that partner has other partners. And so that self-doubt of, no, I really can connect to people. I think that's my biggest hurdle. And paying attention to that self-doubt and not letting it overcome me, because it can be debilitating.
Yeah, I'm sure that's resonating with a lot of people. What we've heard, I think, in these responses is, our world can throw a lot of tough situations and tough messages at us, direct tough messages at us. And we can know on one level that it's wrong. Hopefully we know when, I've felt shame over a system making me feel like, well, you're the parent, you're the problem here. But we all, and of course, so often that just adds to negative messages we have about ourselves. I feel very thankful that I grew up in a household where a fair amount of, well, a lot of positivity was fostered. My parents were able to show me a lot of belief in me. And I mean, I feel like they had more belief in me always than I had in myself. But the fact that they had that was very helpful to me. And when the world tries to counter that for you with these tough negative messages, it's so important on this journey that we're all on as parents that we have ways and the wherewithal to say, that system, that person, that event does not define me and who I am. Because remember, we're going to go back to the lens that we talked about for a good portion of our day that people live life through. Somebody is putting their lens on our situation and making a judgment, right? They're seeing the duck, you're the rabbit. Okay, that won't mean anything to those of you who weren't with us earlier. But it's like there are different ways of seeing things, and somebody is choosing to say, this is how I see you. That is their lens on you, right? And so important that we keep a positive lens on ourselves for us. I have really had to work at this over time. The whole concept of self-love and you've got to love yourself was actually super hard for me. Like, really? I got to love myself? Can I just like myself? And so I think it's really vital that those of us on this journey make sure to take time to appreciate the strengths we do have, the things we do. Okay, Julia, I'm going to mention something you mentioned to me the other day. I'll actually prompt you to speak about it. Julia mentioned a daily activity we all do that she gives herself credit for, because it's not that easy to do it. And in the face of what we all have going on every day. Julia, do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. Waking up in the morning.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's something I could work on.
Yeah.
No, really just like I was thinking about again after Dr. Hellman's TED Talk, hope. It's a profound act of hope to get out of bed every day. And for some people, and we all have known and know these people, that's not an easy thing to do. So just that, every day, just getting out of bed is a profound act of hope that I really give myself credit for.
I love that, because most of us probably just take for granted. Well, of course I do that. I mean,
it's huge.
Right. It is huge. We don't give ourselves enough credit for that. And those of us who give ourselves credit for those small things that are not so small, as we're saying, if we don't think of them as small and we realize, wow, that is an act of hopefulness. That is an action that I am choosing to take. Stay in that, right? That's just hope begets hope. Start with giving yourself credit for, I got out of bed today. Go me. Because not everybody can do that. Okay, I did put in the chat that if anybody wanted to ask a question of the panel, they could. I'm going to guess that you would have put it in the chat if you wanted to, but you can also unmute yourself. The other thing I want to offer is kind of like we did in our small groups, if there's anybody who wants to share based on what the panel said or your own journey with hopefulness, and offer us a few words, that would be fine too. I'm going to just pause for a moment and see if anybody wants to do that before I do a wrap. Okay, not a problem. We want everybody to just feel safe and comfy where they are and take as much as they can for themselves today.
Can I say something, Ruth? I'm
Love you too, and anybody
It's-
else who wants to.
pretty sure Dr. Hellman said it, but it's also from Learned Hopefulness. It's that nurturing and cherishing relationships. And so I think that just comes naturally for me. But because my kids are super intense and needy, I lost that hopefulness in relationships. And so I have a neighbor who is 78. Okay, we are not from the same time period. And yet through the pandemic, before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and now we spend time being together. We go to lunch at least twice a month and just talk about girl stuff. I mean, we're not the same age. There's 28 years difference between us. But I send her cards. I just sent her a Mother's Day card. We bake for each other. We check up on each other every single day. And I think that has given me a sense of hopefulness. She's 78. And let me tell you, she is a young 78. That's what I hope to be when I'm 78, is that young, and that I have value in other people. You just have to really cherish those and nurture them, because sometimes they don't come naturally. But that's really part of hopefulness, is that I have to surround myself with people who genuinely care about me, and not the product that I can produce. Okay, because there are people who care about the product you can produce, or the board meeting you can show up to. I cherish friendships that just love me for me. And that has been super important to strengthening my hopefulness.
Really nice. Does anybody else want to speak into that or anything else right now? I'm going to say what you said really resonated with me. A couple of years ago, probably, I just sort of came to this point where I got very intentional about my future. It was just sort of this aha. I was turning 60 actually, where the aha was, wow, okay, that's a lot of decades gone, but another 2 and 3 in front of me. And I want to be more intentional about what happens in those decades. I've been very happy with all my decades, but I suddenly realized, as they're starting to count down, that there's just things that I want to have in my life that are going to, and they're not really bucket list things to check off necessarily, though there's a few of those, but they're things like Trisha's speaking to, relationships, the quality of relationships that I realize are so important to my life, that I can carry forward to 70, to 80, to 90, if I'm the first in my family to get there. And I really, it makes me excited. I have hit this place of feeling way more adventurous for myself and my life currently than, say, I did 10 years ago, and maybe even 20 years ago. So I really realized I spent a long time with my lens focused elsewhere, mostly on my children, big surprise, right? But I forgot that I needed to keep my lens for myself focused in this positive place, and realize that it's not always going to be about my kids. That's not the life probably any of us want, because even if our kids are younger, most of us can aspire to, boy, we sure hope our children get to some degree of independence, and or it just doesn't make sense that even if our children can't get to total independence, we can't be the only people they depend on, right? I mean, by age alone, that's going to leave them with nobody to depend on a lot of years, right? So we have to set them up towards some sort of independence from our lives. And I think when we're in the thick of it, we sometimes just forget that we could keep a focus on that. And I really know that if I had kept my lens more on my life, that some of my down times with my children would not have felt as down, because I had myself and my self-worth so tied into my children and my parenting, which is really just a part of me, that I let it overshadow these things. And when I started coming out of that and saying, wow, oh, I'm going to have some years that I really need to manage here for myself. Even if I wanted my children to entertain me for the rest of their life, they are not going to do that for me. I am very clear on that. So like I have to, it's just so freeing to feel like, oh, I'm so looking forward to this period where I get to define and create what's ahead for me. That feels really exciting to me at this time. So, okay, that said, come off mute really quickly if you want to add anything. I want to thank all of you so much, my staff in the office who has been tremendous support to making this happen, and all of you who came to share the day with us, those of you who came to also share some of yourselves with everybody here. I hope you're walking away with an increased dose of hope and an understanding of the actions you can take, and to cultivate that in your life. And I want to remind you that you did a vision for yourself, and please, please, please finish that activity with some sort of physical reminder of, yeah, this is what I want in my life, and keep adding to that over time. That's an exercise you could do every year. I have certain things that New Year's Eve always clicks off for me. Oh yeah, I really want to do a visioning exercise about the next year, and I always take it beyond that. So thank you so much. We do have a session for parents, for parent support. Come, and again, so many thanks for joining us today, and especially to our parent panel for this last 50. Wow, we went the full hour, our last hour together. Timing of this is really challenging for me. Okay, everybody take care. See some of you on the next link, and happy life, everyone. Hopeful life. Take care.